Under an October Arizona sun, an animal was spotted perching atop a 40-foot saguaro cactus. It was only when the two cyclists got closer that they figured out what they were seeing. A bobcat, with all four paws gripping the tip of the spiky plant. Just when the men thought the big cat might be stranded, she leaped down and ran away. The sight left them stunned. But it actually happens more often than one would think. Why would a wild bobcat choose a cactus to rest? What unfolds next is a tale of courage, heart, and the wildest ride of their lives. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The Arizona sun, even in early October, had a certain authority. It wasn't the belligerent tyrant of July and August, but more of a stern grandfather who still expected you to sit up straight and finish your vegetables. For Philip Phil Houck and Douglas Doug Carter, both a comfortable 73 years old, it was perfect cycling weather. The air was dry, the heat was manageable, and the trail through the Skyline Regional Park in Buckeye was blissfully empty on a Tuesday morning. "You know," Phil panted, his voice a gravelly wheeze as he pedaled his state-of-the-art and, in his opinion, ridiculously overpriced electric mountain bike. "When we retired out here, I envisioned more relaxing. More sitting. Maybe some light golfing, where the only thing you have to climb is into a cart with a built-in cooler." Doug, gliding along on his traditional human-powered bicycle with the infuriating ease of a man who genuinely enjoyed kale, chuckled. "And miss this, Philly? Look at it, the majesty of the Sonoran Desert. The noble saguaros, standing like silent sentinels." "That sentinel over there looks like it's flipping me off," Phil grumbled, pointing to a saguaro whose two arms were bent in a decidedly rude gesture. "And my prostate is the size of a grapefruit. Every bump on this trail is an adventure I didn't sign up for." Their friendship, forged 50 years ago in a college accounting class they both nearly failed, was a well-oiled machine of grumpy cynicism, Phil, and boundless optimism, Doug. They had retired from the same accounting firm in Chicago, and their wives, bless their patient souls, had conspired to buy neighboring houses in the same Arizona retirement community, ensuring the bickering duo would have a designated playmate for their golden years. Doug, a lifelong birdwatcher and amateur naturalist, slowed his pace. "Did you see that? A cactus wren. Campylorhynchus brunicapillus. Remarkable bird. They build their nests inside chala cacti to protect their young. Nature's ingenuity, eh?" "Ingenious," Phil deadpanned, "living in a house of needles. Sounds like my first marriage. Can we pick up the pace? My sweat is sweating." They rounded a long, sweeping bend, the trail dipping into a dry wash before climbing again. The landscape was a postcard of Arizona. Dusty earth, hardy creosote bushes, and the towering shapes of saguaros, some of which had been standing long before Arizona was even a state. It was against this iconic backdrop that Doug suddenly slammed on his brakes, skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust that sent Phil into a coughing fit. "For the love of... Doug, a little warning next time?" Phil sputtered, wiping grit from his sunglasses. "Did you spot a rare and elusive pebble you want to tell me about?" But Doug wasn't listening. He was staring, transfixed, at a particularly colossal saguaro about 50 yards off the trail. It had to be 40 feet tall, a granddaddy of a cactus, its leathery green skin wrinkled with age. And perched right on its crown, like a bizarre living hood ornament, was something. "Philly," Doug whispered, his voice tight with awe. "You need to see this." Phil sighed, the sound of a man deeply put upon. "If it's another lizard doing push-ups, I swear I'm leaving you here." He followed Doug's gaze, squinting. The shape was too big for a bird, too furry. It was a lumpy, tawny blob sitting serenely atop a plant composed entirely of vertical needles. "What in tarnation is that?" Phil asked, genuinely intrigued for the first time that morning. "A giant squirrel? Did somebody's cat get stuck?" "Get the binoculars," Doug urged, fumbling for the water bottle on his bike frame. "They're in my pack." Phil retrieved the binoculars and lifted them to his eyes, fiddling with the focus wheel. The blurry blob sharpened into a distinct and utterly unbelievable image. Tufted ears, a short, bobbed tail, a face with the unmistakable mutton chop ruff of a feline predator, and 4 paws planted firmly on the very tip of the giant spiky cactus. "Well, I'll be," Phil breathed, lowering the binoculars. He handed them to Doug. "It's a bobcat." Doug's hands trembled slightly as he took them. "No way. It can't be." He raised them to his eyes, and a long, low whistle escaped his lips. "Good Lord, Phil. It's a bobcat, a full-grown female by the looks of it, just sitting there, on top of a 40-foot cactus." They stood there in stunned silence for a full minute. 2 retirees on a dusty trail, staring at a sight that defied all logic. The bobcat seemed completely unbothered. She groomed a paw, licked her shoulder, and then stared out across the desert with a look of regal indifference, as if surveying her kingdom from the world's most uncomfortable throne. "We have to get a picture of this," Phil said, a thrill in his voice. This was something he could tell his grandchildren about. This was better than golf. He pulled out his phone, wrestling with the camera settings. "Hold still, you magnificent suicidal furball." He snapped a few photos, the tiny click of the shutter sounding unnaturally loud in the desert silence. The bobcat's ears swiveled in their direction, but she didn't seem alarmed. "What do you think she's doing up there?" Doug wondered aloud, his naturalist's brain kicking into overdrive. Maybe she's sunning herself? But why there? Of all the comfortable, non-pokey rocks in Arizona. "Maybe she's just crazy," Phil offered. "A cactus-loving nutjob. Every species has them. I had an Uncle Barry who thought he could communicate with squirrels. He wasn't wrong, but the squirrels had some pretty radical ideas about nut redistribution." As they watched, a subtle shift in the scene caught Doug's eye. It was a flicker of movement in the shade of a dense ironwood tree at the base of the saguaro. He put the binoculars back to his eyes, sweeping the area below the cactus. His blood ran cold. "Phil," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we are not alone." Phil scoffed. "Of course we're not. There's a cat on a cactus. Try to keep up." "No, down below, in the shade of that tree." Phil took the binoculars, his hands feeling suddenly clumsy. He found the ironwood tree and scanned the shadows. At first, he saw nothing but dappled light and dark branches. Then, a patch of shadow detached itself from the others, resolving into a long, muscular, tawny body. A tail, as long as a man's arm and tipped with black, twitched almost imperceptibly. The head lifted, and 2 pale, merciless eyes stared directly up at the bobcat. It was a mountain lion, a big one. Its shoulders were broad and powerful, and a faint, jagged scar ran down one side of its muzzle, giving it a permanent sneer. The air, which had been filled with a sense of bizarre wonder, was now thick with primal menace. "Oh man," Phil breathed, his earlier bravado evaporating. The grapefruit-sized prostate he'd been complaining about suddenly felt like a pea. That's a puma, a cougar." "Mountain lion," Doug corrected automatically, his voice a strained whisper. "Puma concolor. And he's waiting." The whole incredible scene snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The Bobcat wasn't a cactus enthusiast. She wasn't crazy. She was trapped. She had scrambled up the only available escape route to get away from a predator that could kill her with a single swipe of its paw. The saguaro wasn't a throne. It was a fortress, and she was under siege. Her name, in the silent language of her kind, was Swift Paws, and her world had shrunk to a circle of pain and fear. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her paws, though tough, were pierced by a dozen saguaro spines, sending little jolts of fire up her legs with every shift of her weight. Below her, she could feel the deep, resonant thrum of her own terrified heartbeat. Just an hour ago, she had been teaching her 3 kittens the fine art of the pounce. They were in their hidden den, a hollowed-out crevice in a rocky outcrop, tucked away and safe. The kits, clumsy and impossibly fluffy, had been taking turns stalking a dried-up grasshopper, their tiny, fierce growls more adorable than menacing. A surge of fierce maternal love had washed over her. They were her world, her future. She had left them sleeping in a contented pile to go on a short hunt. A fat desert cottontail had been her target, but as she'd moved through the scrub, a scent had stopped her dead. It was the sharp, musky odor of her mortal enemy, Old Scarface. He was a massive male mountain lion who had claimed this territory as his own. He was ruthless, territorial, and saw bobcats not as fellow predators, but as competition to be eliminated. She had scrambled for safety, her speed her only asset. But he was relentless, cutting off her path back to the den. He had herded her, cornered her, forcing her into the open flatland where the giant saguaros stood. With the cougar's hot breath practically on her tail, she had done the unthinkable. She had leaped onto the trunk of the tallest saguaro, her claws finding purchase in the fleshy, corrugated bark. Ignoring the searing pain as the spines dug into her flesh, she had shimmied her way up, foot by agonizing foot, driven by a desperate primal instinct to survive, to get back to her kits. Now she was perched 40 feet in the air, a prisoner on a pillar of thorns. Below, Old Scarface paced with predatory patience. He knew he couldn't climb the saguaro. It offered no purchase for an animal his size. But he also knew she couldn't stay up there forever. Thirst, exhaustion, or a loss of balance would eventually bring her down. He could wait. He had all the time in the world. She could smell her own blood, coppery and sharp, welling up from the pads of her paws. She ignored the pain. What truly terrified her was the thought of her kittens waking up alone and hungry. They were too young to fend for themselves. If she didn't return, they would not survive. The thought was a physical agony, far worse than the cactus spines. Then she saw them. 2 strange, 2-legged creatures on their odd wheeled machines. They were noisy, they smelled peculiar, and they were staring at her. Her first instinct was fear, but it was quickly overshadowed by the greater threat below. The humans were an unknown quantity. Old Scarface was a certainty. She watched them, her golden eyes narrowed, a desperate plan beginning to form in her exhausted mind. Perhaps these noisy creatures could be the distraction she needed. "Okay, new plan," Phil whispered, his eyes wide. We get back on our bikes, we pedal away very, very quietly, and we live to complain about our various ailments another day. And leave her up there? Doug hissed, horrified. Phil, he's going to wait her out. We have to do something. Do something? Doug, it's a mountain lion. What are we going to do, challenge him to a game of pinochle? It's the circle of life. Sometimes the circle, eats the fluffy parts. That's a mother bobcat, Phil. I'd bet my retirement fund on it. She's got kittens stashed somewhere nearby. She's not just fighting for her life, she's fighting for theirs. We can't just leave. Doug's voice was filled with a conviction Phil hadn't heard since Doug had argued with an IRS agent over a questionable charitable donation to a Save the Ferrets Foundation that turned out to be a guy in a ferret costume. Phil looked from the terrified bobcat to the patient mountain lion, then to his best friend's determined face. He let out a long, suffering sigh. Fine. What does Mr. National Geographic propose we do? You want to try and reason with him? Excuse me, Mr. Lion, sir, but would you mind awfully not murdering the kitty cat? It's upsetting, my friend. We need to scare him off, Doug said, his mind racing. Big cats are ambush predators. They don't like confrontation. We need to seem big, loud, and unpredictable. Well, we've got unpredictable covered, Phil muttered. I had a bran muffin for breakfast. Anything could happen. Okay, I'm thinking, Doug said, pacing in a small circle. We shout. We wave our arms. We make ourselves look bigger. He's 150 pounds of muscle and teeth. We're two old guys with a combined body fat percentage that could grease the entire US Navy. He's not going to be impressed. We have to try, Doug insisted. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and yelled, Hey! You, get out of here, you big bully! His voice, thin and reedy in the vastness of the desert, was completely ignored by the mountain lion, which didn't so much as twitch an ear. The bobcat, however, looked down at them with an expression that seemed to say, Really? That's the best you've got? Okay, that didn't work, Doug admitted, his face flushed. You think? Phil retorted. Let me try. He cleared his throat and bellowed in his best Chicago construction worker voice, Hey, pal, my buddy and I are going to come over there and turn you into a rug if you don't scram. The mountain lion slowly turned its head, fixed them with a contemptuous yellow glare for a solid 3 seconds, and then turned back to its vigil, the dismissal so complete it was physically insulting. He's not scared of us, Doug, Phil said, his voice dropping. He probably thinks we're meals on wheels. They tried throwing small rocks in the lion's general direction. The pebbles landed with pathetic little pings 10 feet short of their target. They tried clapping their hands and stomping their feet. The lion yawned, showing a cavernous mouth full of terrifyingly large teeth. Doug was getting desperate. My bike pump! It makes a hissing sound. Snakes! Maybe he's afraid of snakes. He unstrapped the pump and began working it furiously, producing a series of asthmatic-sounding hisses. The mountain lion remained monumentally unimpressed. Phil put his head in his hands. We look like idiots, Doug. We are two certifiable grade A idiots, and we are going to be remembered as the hikers who died trying to save a cat from a bigger cat by using a bicycle pump. Up on the cactus, Swift Paws watched the bizarre display with a sliver of renewed hope. The two legs were loud, they were persistent, and most importantly, they were distracting old Scarface. His attention, which had been solely focused on her, was now divided. He kept glancing over at the strange, noisy creatures. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. Phil, defeated, leaned against his e-bike. This is hopeless. That poor thing is doomed. He fiddled absently with the digital display on his handlebars. He'd barely learned how to use the thing. It had 5 levels of pedal assist, a horn that sounded like a sick goose, and a bunch of other buttons he was too scared to press. In his frustration, his thumb slipped and mashed a small red button he'd never touched before. The effect was instantaneous and astonishing. A deafening, piercing alarm erupted from a speaker on the bike's frame. It wasn't a horn. It was a high-tech anti-theft siren, screeching out a series of frantic electronic whoops and shrieks at an ear-splitting volume. Wee, oh, beep, 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 wee, oh. The sound was utterly alien to the desert. It was a mechanical scream that cut through the natural silence like a chainsaw. Phil leaped back as if electrocuted. Doug clapped his hands over his ears. And the mountain lion for the first time reacted. The big cat shot to its feet, its body coiled like a spring. Its ears flattened, and its head whipped around, searching for the source of the horrific, unnatural noise. This wasn't the sound of a rival, or of prey, or of anything it understood. It was the sound of danger, of the unknown, the sound of human machinery at its most obnoxious. The alarm continued to shriek. The mountain lion took a hesitant step back, then another. It glanced up at the bobcat, then back towards the source of the noise. Its nerve finally broke. With a low, guttural snarl of frustration and fear, old Scarface turned and bolted, melting back into the desert scrub and disappearing as silently as he had appeared. Silence descended once more, broken only by the frantic pounding of 2 human hearts and the fading echo of the alarm, which Phil finally managed to shut off by mashing every button on the console. They both stared at the spot where the lion had been, then up at the cactus. The bobcat, swift paws, saw her chance. The siege was broken. Without a moment's hesitation, she gathered her powerful legs beneath her. For one breathtaking second, she was silhouetted against the brilliant blue sky, a perfect statue of feline grace. And then she leaped. It was not a fall, it was a controlled 40-foot plummet. She twisted in midair, her body extended, aiming for a soft patch of sandy earth. She hit the ground with a surprisingly soft thud, absorbing the impact with bent legs like a master acrobat. She stumbled for a second, shook her head, and then took off, a tawny blur of desperate speed. She didn't run away from them. She ran past them, and as she did, she turned her head, and for the briefest of moments, her golden eyes met Phil's. It wasn't a look of gratitude, not exactly. It was a look of fierce, wild, unbreakable purpose. And then she was gone. Phil and Doug stood in stunned, breathless silence. Did you see that? Doug finally managed to say, his voice full of wonder. I saw it, Phil said quietly. But I'm not sure I believe it. They were quiet on the ride back, the earlier bickering forgotten. The desert around them seemed different now, charged with a new kind of energy. The saguaros no longer looked like silent sentinels. They looked like hiding places, fortresses, and silent witnesses to dramas they could barely comprehend. As they neared the edge of the park, Doug slowed down again. Phil, listen. Phil stopped, straining his ears. Over the hum of his bike's motor, he heard it. A faint, high-pitched mewing sound. It was coming from a jumble of rocks just off the trail. Slowly, quietly, they got off their bikes and crept towards the sound. Peeking over a large boulder, they saw a small, dark crevice. and huddled just inside, blinking in the daylight, were 3 tiny spotted balls of fluff. 3 bobcat kittens, no bigger than his hand, their blue eyes wide with curiosity. Their hearts clenched. This was why. This was what she had been fighting for. They backed away as silently as they had come, giving the den a wide berth. They knew the mother would not return as long as they were there. As they got back on the trail, they saw her watching them from a ridge 100 yards away. She was waiting patiently, a silent guardian, ensuring the coast was clear before she returned to her precious family. That evening, the 2 friends sat on Phil's back patio, watching the sun dip below the distant mountains, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. A couple of cold beers sat between them. "You know," Phil said, breaking a long, comfortable silence, "my daughter's always on me about getting a pet. A dog, maybe. Says it would be good for my blood pressure." Doug smiled. "And what do you tell her?" Phil took a long sip of his beer and looked out at the darkening desert. "I tell her I don't need one. Turns out this whole place is full of them. And they're a heck of a lot more interesting than a poodle." He raised his bottle in a silent toast. "To the Cactus Cat." Doug clinked his bottle against Phil's. "To the Cactus Cat," he agreed. "And to ridiculously loud bicycle alarms." They both laughed, the sound warm and genuine in the cool desert air. They had seen the circle of life, all right. And for one incredible, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful morning, they had been lucky enough to nudge the circle just a little in favor of the fluffy parts.